Hey everyone, in today's episode, I'm going to get into the best suburbs to rentvest in. Look, the reason I do this is because I did a topic on rentvesting before and it's quite popular and a lot of people speak to me about this on a daily basis. So in today's episode, I'll get into a few things. First of all, what rentvesting is. Secondly, how to make rentvesting work. And thirdly, the best suburbs in New South Wales to do so. And finally, the best suburbs in Victoria to do so. Now, I do these two areas, particularly New South Wales and Queensland, because if you look at my property clock episodes, they're at the best possible part of the cycle and you've got a whole growth cycle ahead in a lot of these suburbs. So that's the reason I do it. Look, rentvesting itself, what is it? It is where individuals rent a home in a location that suits their lifestyle while owning an investment property in a more affordable area. So it's where you live where you want to and invest where your money that makes sense. That's the easiest way to describe it in a sort of laissez-faire everyday term. Look, how to make sense of rentvesting and make it work is to really buy quality assets. So really, look, what I'm showing you here is this is just the Aussie Home Loans 25-year report, and it's showing you the value increases on average year to year between basically 1993 and 2018. I like showing everyone this again because it's before your once in a generation or once in a long time, or should I say very abnormal market, 0.1% interest rates, where everywhere in Australia went up by 30%, even if you threw a dartboard at the map. But anyway, you can see clearly here that Sydney and Melbourne did very well. I'm telling you right now, Brisbane will do better than that in the future though, because the economy has diversified quite a lot. And you had a lot of wealthier sort of people from Sydney and Melbourne move their businesses up there. So I expect Brisbane to probably do in the sevens here anyway, but clearly your Sydney and Melbourne are your best performers, and your sort of Sydney base and your Wollongong Central Coast, Newcastle, and your Geelong. And if you count Mornington Peninsula as outside of Melbourne, it really is Melbourne. I count it as Melbourne. Those are two good performers as well. So the thing you need to do is buy quality assets because they will take your investing to the next level and your wealth to the next level. That's as simple as that. The thing you need to think of really here is total return and your internal rate of return when it comes to investing in terms of rentvesting or just investing money in general. So to give everyone an indication of what they are, your total return basically is your gross rental yield plus your 30-year capital growth. Your internal rate of return is a metric used in financial analysis to estimate the profitability of potential investments over a period of time. So the key part of this though is, and I'm going into this and this is giving everyone some juice today because not a lot of people know this and actually can't do it correctly, is with internal rate of return, capital growth is significantly more important than cash flow. And look, I'll tell you the reason why this is the case. So here's an exact example of it. And this is a suburb called Mayfield in Newcastle. So this is just off SQM. People can fact check me on this if they want, but this is publicly available data. So on the left-hand side here, you've got weekly asking property prices. So you see there, it's gone from probably about 450,000, right up to around $1 million today. And that's probably over the last 12, 14 years or so. And rents have gone from about, $300 a week, 320 maybe, right up to about 700, 750 at the moment. Now you'd think with something like this happening, right, that you'd have, rental yield keeping up with the prices, but that's not the case because if you go to this here, you'll see that back in the early 2010s, you had close to 5.5% to 6% yield, and today you've got about 3.5% to 4% yield in Mayfield, and that is despite rents literally more than doubling in the same time period, right? But you got to remember, this is the key thing where people go wrong, and this is actually an abnormal rental market. Rents usually don't go up this much. They usually do about 3 to 4% growth year on year. And this has done about 5.4% or so of growth over the last 10 years or so. So it's actually outdone its long-term trend. So the yield is actually higher than it probably should be at the moment, which is a good thing to buy. But if you look at, for example, the two graphs, what you'll see here is the capital growth has exponentially outdone year after year after year the rental growth. And that is common in suburbs like that. So your top suburbs will generally, like you can see in your inverse relationship here, they'll generally do 7 to 10% in terms terms of capital appreciation. So what happens with that is then rents will generally, that goes up by 7 to 10% on average year on year. Now, it's not linear, but over the long term it is. You can make a line to best fit graph if you want, but I mean, rental yield will generally do 3 to 4% growth year on year. Now, what proves that is if rental growth was to do 7 to 10%, the average house in Australia would be 650 to 700. Sorry, the average house in Australia would be probably around $3,000 a week to rent. Now, it's not. It's about $650 to $700 a week to rent right now. That's what proves the inverse relationship, especially in the best suburbs. You look at Vaucluse, Bellevue Hill. You look at, Middle Park, New Farm, Albert Park, Tenerife, Balimba, any really good suburb with very high growth, they're generally very, very low yielding. And the earlier the suburb has started to be a very good suburb, the lower the yield. So that's why Bellevue Hill, Point Piper are some of the lowest yielding suburbs, but have some of the best capital growth because they've performed so well over such a long time that the inverse relationship has affected them over so many years. Some are more than 100 years. So that's the reason you have that. And if anyone wants to fact check on that, just literally go to SQM, go to property sales data in good capital growth suburbs long term from the 1980s and look at what they were yielding back then. Some were yielding like 8 to 10% back then, believe it or not. So just go and have a look at that for anyone that's have a look at land sales, look at property sales, look at, even newspapers from back then of both renting and both purchasing. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about there. Just remember these rules when it comes to rent vesting though. There's a couple of things that are really important. You're paying off yesterday's deflated dollars with tomorrow's inflated dollars. So yesterday, and the thing about that is inflation is your friend. So yesterday's dollars, let's say take 30 years ago, for example, in the 90s, right? You could have bought a home in Sydney or Melbourne, or even Brisbane for like 150 grand, right? And back then, don't get me wrong, no doubt, that felt like a lot of money. Imagine having that, imagine still having a mortgage, let's say 28 years into your mortgage or something, and you had $7,000 to $15,000 left in your mortgage. That's probably realistic, right? Imagine how you would pay that off in like 3 months with rent today, right? But what I'm saying here is you've bought it at yesterday's deflated dollars because today's dollars are worth so much. So that's where yesterday's deflated dollars comes in and tomorrow's inflated dollars comes in that you're paying it off with. So inflation really is your friend. The biggest rule you need to remember is as well, the value of the dollar has been completely corrupted, okay? So it's not that, for example, that necessarily, should I say land it's worth more today because of the dollar, but it's worth exponentially more because the value has been corrupted. Now, as I said, because the dollar's not on the gold standard and it's not finite anymore, what has basically happened is whenever anything goes wrong, the government just prints more money. How do you think they pay for everything? So all they do is print more money and that flows straight into the economy and sits in the economy. Now, the bad thing about when the dollar has been corrupted, and especially with inflation of assets, is it's generally all the money flows into hard assets and assets that are worth something. So what happens is generally the people who can afford it scoop up all the best assets and they continue to get a lot more wealthy. And then the people at the bottom get a lot poorer because they can't afford those assets, right? So you need to understand that with investing, the value of the dollar has a lot to do with the asset value, but it's been completely corrupted, and that's the reason why assets are so expensive, and they'll continue to get more expensive. So you need to understand that as well. And then finally, you cannot save at the same rate as top asset growth. Perfect example, I met someone who was still in school about 10, 15 years ago, right? And he was saying, and he was older than me, he was saying, I want to buy my house in Sydney outright. I'll save up $600,000 over the next 12 years and I'll buy my house outright. And he tried to do it. He still doesn't own a house today because $600,000 was a house right out west in Sydney at that time, right? But he can't even afford that today because he was trying to save for the house outright. And I'm still talking to him, still talking to him, and he has finally got a house with a mortgage. But if he had done it 10, 15, I think it was about 12 years ago or so, he probably would almost own the house outright if he had bought it in those days, because he actually had a significant deposit. He had about, he only bought it at 600,000. He had about, 100,000. So he could have bought it realistically back then, but he decided not to. So you got to remember, the key thing is you get into the market when you can, you buy the right asset and you pay it down, and inflation and the dollar will help you doing it. Inflation is your friend. Remember that. That's how it works. So those are just a couple of rules for everyone to remember in New South Wales to Rentvest in. And I'm going to start at sub $800,000. And the suburb I'll start with is Canwall. So for those that don't know Canwall, it's a suburb that's in the Central Coast. It's just on the western shore of Tuggerah Lake. It's very close to Wyong, very close to Lake Haven. It's basically between the two of them. Now, a reason why Canwall is such a good suburb to invest in, I've actually bought a property recently for a client here at $750,000, which is an outstanding deal. Very big block, brick veneer home. Don't get me wrong, original, but in good condition. Really good home in that. But the reason it's such a good suburb to invest in Canwall is simply because it is situated, first of all, it's an old estate, so it's completely built. People have owned here for a number of years. So there's actually a lot of long-term residents that have very low mortgages, and some that even own their homes outright here. But Canwall is actually near all the future employment hubs of the Central Coast, and it's very close to Wyong and the train line to Sydney as well. So it also fronts the lake, so that actually pushes prices up because of water views. So Canwall is basically between Wyong there and kind of like Hamlin Terrace. It's kind of where that little blue dot between them is along that line there. That's basically where it is, right? Canwall. And you'll see it's near Tuggerah, Wyong, Blue Haven, Bushells Ridge, which are where all the main jobs are going to be in the future. It's an old estate. People here have fairly low mortgages compared to their incomes. And there's next to no public housing. There's not that much public housing in Canwall, not really none. So it's a really good suburb to consider for that. Really good for long-term growth. So that's a suburb for under 800,000. You can still pick it up for, probably 770,000 at the moment to maybe 760, 770. That number is already moving. This suburb has started to move already. So it'd be time to reach out if you're really considering buying in Canwall. Let's get on to the next one. And the issue is going to be, this suburb is going to be quite hard to buy for under 900,000, but I have managed to for a couple of clients recently, and that suburb is Mayfield in Newcastle. So look, Mayfield itself don't get me wrong, it used to be a very working class suburb. If you speak to someone, especially a boomer from Newcastle who hasn't really been there recently, they will have very bad things to say about it. Similar to somewhere probably like Footscray or Seddon, probably for a boomer in Melbourne, or somewhere like Marrickville or Dulwich Hill, even probably in Sydney, right? But now this has completely changed. So look, Mayfield really has started to gentrify quite a bit. It's continuing to do so. If you go down the main street there, it feels like another CBD basically of Newcastle. You have a lot of shops nearby. You have quite a few coffee shops and gentrified kind of stores there too. Particularly the northern pocket of Mayfield. It feels like a wealthier suburb kind of Sydney's inner west or something. Like really beautiful tree-lined streets, quiet, nice, completely flood-free as well. So that's where I tend to buy in Mayfield. But just to show everyone what I'm talking about here, really, this is your walk score of Mayfield. So you can see the darker green is obviously a walker's paradise. The green is very good to walk in. So you see just around the CBD centre there of Mayfield, it's like really a walker's paradise. You could pretty much walk to the shops there and home and to parks and everything like that, particularly if you're on the north side, and you have no problems there at all. It's a very good place, to buy and hold longer term. The top end of Mayfield and the better streets, some of those properties have done literally like 9.5 to 10% plus growth since the 80s. So it's incredible. I've seen properties there that sold for like $1 million, or bought for like, I kid you not, in 1980, like $32,000 or $36,000, $40,000. It's crazy what some of these houses are done. But great suburb to consider. One I'm very hot on, one I really like, that in Mayfield. Great suburb to Rentvest in New South Wales for under 900K. That number of 900K is, or the median's already above that. It's shrinking by the day. So if you're interested, reach out very soon, because that number's going very fast and it will only get worse. Let's go under $1 million, and this is kind of the max I wanted to do, because for people that don't have as much money, $1 million's generally the top top price I want to Rentvest for. It's just what they do. And that suburb is going to be Islington in Newcastle as well. So it's very close to Mayfield. Islington's about 3.5 to 4 k's from the CBD. It's a very inner suburb of Newcastle. It's a very kind of like trendy kind of suburb. It's like a little villagey kind of suburb, Islington, right? Now, I actually picked up a property earlier for a client for about $915,000. A very, very good deal. You're still picking up for mid-900s. It'd be hard to get the same deal for that, but it was a very good deal at the time. And it still is if you look at it today. But I mean, a really good street. Islington actually fronts Hamilton Station, which is one of the stations that has direct trains to Sydney. Really good suburb in that. It's actually a part of the transport orientated plan as well, with high density too. But look, some pockets of Islington have done literally 10% growth long term. Incredible numbers. And really, the thing about Islington you need to understand, it's kind of like Newcastle's trendy Newtown. It's kind of like a very alternate kind of area, very well held. A lot of people like living here because you got all the, like Beaumont Street in Hamilton's walkable distance from Islington. You're right next to Hamilton Station. You got a lot of kind of boutique cafes, antique stores, all those kinds of things as well. And it's very well known in Newcastle for being that kind of area, and people will happily go there regularly. So it's very in demand from a lot of different kinds of people as well. So that's probably your best suburb to invest for under $1 million, Rentvesting for under $1 million in New South Wales. But let's get into Victoria. Now, I talk about Victoria a lot, and I know I've mentioned other suburbs previously about Rentvesting, and this is one I've mentioned previously as well, and it's for under 600k in Victoria, and that suburb is a suburb called Breakwater. And that's in Geelong. Breakwater is a suburb that's relatively unknown. It's basically right next to the racecourse of Geelong. It's the easiest way to describe it. Now, it's only about 3 k's or so from Geelong CBD, and it's very underpriced. I mean, I picked up homes here for like just over 500,000 to 550. Look, can't really go wrong here. It's already pretty much all built. There is an industrial part of it, but the residential part of it is very good. It's all built. A lot of detached homes actually on large blocks. It's a rare thing in Geelong because the inner suburbs of Geelong are very villagey. Most of the blocks are 280 to 350 metres squared or so, but Breakwater is still getting 550 or so metres squared quite regularly. I mean, you're picking up very low, and just the location, look, this is where Breakwater is. As I said, near the racecourse there. That's East Geelong, so it basically neighbours East Geelong there, and you're still picking up, in the 500,000. So incredible numbers here. It's one of the few suburbs that actually hasn't performed overly well since COVID, so it's got a long way to go, and I mean, really, really well located here. I love Breakwater as a suburb to invest in. You can't go wrong here, no doubt. Let's get into under $700,000, and let's keep it pretty simple. This is North Geelong. I mentioned it previously. So like its description, North Geelong is just north of the Geelong CBD. It is basically a suburb that's starting to gentrify now. You have a lot of knockdown rebuilds similar to this, but it's really cheap, as I said, in an expensive pocket of Geelong. So Rippleside and Drumcondra are right next to it. They're over $1 million. It neighbours Geelong West, which is probably the best suburb in terms of long-term capital growth in all of Geelong. So that's where North Geelong is. I mean, you're still picking them up for like in the $600,000 marks, even the low 600s, which is really good. I've even picked one up before for under 600, believe it or not. So really good in that. Increasing income demographics, particularly if you're in the right pocket. So definitely one to consider that in North Geelong. Under 800k. Now, be careful with this one because this is becoming very hard to find even now. And funny enough, I was even picking it up under 750k recently. And the suburb is Braybrook in Melbourne's inner west. So it's in the Maribyrnong Council region. Braybrook was known as Melbourne's Bronx years and years ago in the late 90s and early 2000s. You had about 64% of public housing. At the moment today, that number's about 19% or so, but more than half of that percentage is actually aged housing. So it's like your vets, your single ladies, your widows, people who have been through, terrible situations and that kind of thing. And it doesn't really feel like, more than half, it doesn't really feel like public housing. It feels more so like you're in like an aged sort of care facility. So just remember that in Braybrook. But I mean, the suburb itself has done nearly 10% capital growth long term. You can check that via the Aussie Home Loans 25-year report and CoreLogic. You can do both. But really what happened there is, don't get me wrong, it's lightly gentrifying, but it's rejuvenating because of its location being only 10 or 11 k's from the CBD. That's starting to genuinely gentrify now. And it's a part of the actual state government project called the Braybrook Regeneration Project. So this is basically a government incentive to completely change the whole suburb. And this will include, so this is gentrifying whilst changing the whole look of the suburb too. So a lot of the public housing is being completely sold off here. You only have to look at what's going for rent in clumps. And you'll see exactly what's going on. So that number is probably going to be, I reckon, by the end of the decade, something around 10%. And most of the housing that will be kept there, I can guarantee you, will be the aged public housing, because they generally don't like moving them on. So what's going to happen here is it'll have a bit of public housing still, maybe around 10% by the end of the decade, but that 10% won't feel like public housing. It will change the whole nature of the suburb as well, even more so. So Braybrook's a great suburb to consider. Very hard to pick up the right dwelling though for under 800k now. I was picking these up very regularly for that, probably a couple of months ago, but the demand's set in and people know this is a good opportunity now. Maybe I'm a part of that, I don't know. So sorry for people who are looking to buy now, but you can reach out to me and I'll find you something still at that mark, because I know how to do it. That's the thing. It's very hard to if you don't know what you're doing though. So for under 800k in Victoria, Braybrook's a great option anyway. Let's get into under 900k. And look, this suburb, the median is under 900k, but I mean, really, it's you're still picking them up under 900k in the right area if you know where to look and how to bid and that kind of thing. And that suburb is Footscray. So look, Footscray is one of Melbourne's most trendy suburbs. It's actually known as pretty much the coolest suburb in all of Melbourne. Well, maybe not all the time, but it has been in the Time Out review before, I know. 6k's or so from the CBD. It's known for the Footscray market, as you can see here. But really, it's one of the fastest gentrifying suburbs in all of Melbourne. So you see here, you got 2006 and 2021, and this is your weekly household income and then your mortgage repayments. So you'll see in 2006, you had $874 a week weekly household income, and now it's $1,763. So that's pretty much more than doubled. And that ratio of what your weekly household income to your median monthly mortgage repayments has shrunk like crazy. So people can afford this easily in the suburb. Really good suburb to buy in. I mean, it's gentrifying a lot. It's changed its nature. It's one of my favorite areas to buy. You can get, I mean, like 4% yield in Footscray, which is crazy. I've even picked up properties around 800 and even sometimes in the sevens in Footscray, believe it or not. So great suburb to consider in that. Let's finish off with my final one in this whole episode, and that is for under $1 million in Victoria. Again, I don't want to go above $1 million because for Rentvesting, it is generally people buying under $1 million or even in the low millions. And that suburb, I have got hate over in the past because people think of the suburb 30 and 20 years ago and they think of, I don't like to live there and that. But remember, when I'm saying Rentvesting, it is an unemotional decision. It's only about capital growth and rental. It is about total return. That's what it's about, and your internal rate of return. So that suburb is Kensington in inner Melbourne. Now, Kensington has been known as kind of a bit of a derelict suburb, a bit of an industrial suburb in Melbourne. But today, this is what it kind of looks like. So you got a lot of like trendy cafes, a lot of your well-maintained, should I say, cottages, Victorians, Edwardian sort of homes, similar to this. But what's going for it really is its incredible location and demographics. So you see where it is right here. I mean, it neighbours North and West Melbourne, right next to Parkville, really beautiful suburb in Melbourne Zoo there. Right next to Flemington Racecourse. There's not much public housing really in Kensington. There is a bit of industrial area. A lot of people don't like living there, but in terms of capital growth, it's done like 9.5% growth long term on average. Better streets do even better than that. Now, look at the demographics down here. Median weekly household income, $22.16, that is per week. And monthly mortgage repayments, $21.62. So people earn more per week here than their monthly mortgage repayments. So if you think of a mortgage rate of 30% of gross income, these people have way more than that. It's more than 25%. Less than 25% that they are paying to their monthly mortgage rent. So the resident population can afford this as well. And it's a suburb where people who want to send their kids to the good schools in inner Melbourne, and also people who want to live close to work, who are childless professionals or just wealthy professionals, will want to live. So that's the reason it's a good area to buy. And rent is expensive in Kensington. For a three-bedder, it's like $750 to $800 a week for a relatively decent set, like three-bedroom home. So great yield, great suburb to consider in that. Don't get caught up in what boomers and people who haven't been here, who haven't invested here and see what the suburb can do have done. This is the truth of the numbers. It's the only thing that matters when it comes to rent vesting. Great for under $1 million. But look, I hope everyone's enjoyed this episode. And if you're someone looking for a buyer's agent to buy in the best suburbs in the country, or Rentvest, or even if you want a strategy session just to know, what to do. And I think the strategy itself is probably even more important than the purchase itself. You can reach out for a free 30-minute consult via www.compoundinvest.com.au/inquire. That is in the description below, and it's completely free, obligation free, and we just have a chat over the phone for about half an hour, and I'll give you a good understanding about what you can do and where we can go from here. But I also offer a thing on my website called Premier Properties. So that's the best performing properties in the country that have a yield above, not a yield, sorry, a total return above 13%. So you 30-year capital growth plus your gross rental yield of above 13%. And now that's better than most hedge funds on Wall Street. You're not getting much better than, especially if you're leveraging an asset at 80 to 90%. So it's definitely something to consider. Sign up for Premier Properties via www.compoundinvest.com.au. But I hope it's been a great episode for everyone, and thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.